Hey everyone, I'm Matt Stalford and welcome back to the Bully Pulpit. This is the first episode of our third season, and as always, we at the Bully Pulpit are dedicated to bringing you compelling and concise reporting on the issues that matter most. This is also our 10th episode, and we're so thankful to our staff and our viewers who have helped us make it this far. Today, we'll be tackling the complex issue of immigration, particularly focusing on the recent migration surge from Central America into the United States. While those who migrate to the United States come from all corners of the world, we're focusing on Central American migration because of the conversations this issue has sparked regarding human rights and what it means to be an American. To start us off, we need to understand the United States' history of immigration policy, both in terms of who we've historically allowed into the country and who we've allowed to become citizens. The process in which a non-citizen legally becomes a U.S. citizen is called naturalization. The United States Constitution, in Article 1, Section 8, allows Congress to establish a uniform rule of naturalization for the United States. However, native-born citizens are exempt from this rule of naturalization because the 14th Amendment guarantees birthright citizenship to anybody born in the United States. Congress did pass laws restricting the naturalization of foreigners during the first 100 years of the United States, but the immigration process was open to anybody who passed a health inspection at entry ports. Possibly the most restrictive of the naturalization laws passed by Congress were the Alien Acts of 1798, which were passed by the Federalist Party to weaken the power of the opposition party, Thomas Jefferson's Democratic Republicans. Ever since most of the Alien Acts were repealed, immigrants have been able to become citizens after 5 years of living in the U.S. Since the late 19th century, however, the U.S. government has become more restrictive toward immigrants. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was the earliest immigration law targeting a specific ethnic group, banning Chinese people from coming to the United States. This was in response to a panic by many Californians who were resentful of the large number of Chinese immigrants who had come to their state for work. Immigration quotas based on ethnicity were expanded upon with the 1924 Immigration Act, which used a national origins quota to limit immigration from certain places, including Asia and Eastern Europe. This system was weakened in 1952, then overhauled in 1965 by the passage of the Hart-Celler Act, which created a more complex system that we'll soon discuss. So although there have been recent attempts to overhaul the U.S. immigration system, the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act is what currently governs our policies. Now that we have an understanding of how the United States has processed immigrants in the past, we need to take a look at the ways in which people can legally enter the United States today. First, we'll look at family-based immigration, which is the most common means of entry. According to the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, spouses, unmarried children, and siblings of U.S. citizens are eligible for green cards, though siblings have a longer wait time. A green card, formerly known as a permanent residence card, allows foreign nationals to live and work permanently in the United States. Green card holders can bring spouses and unmarried children to the U.S., but they have a longer waiting period than those of U.S. citizens. According to the Department of Homeland Security, family members accounted for about 65% of the annual number of documented immigrants between 2013 and 2015. The remaining share of documented immigrants come from a variety of places. About 15% of documented immigrants are admitted because they were sponsored by an employer. In order to sponsor an immigrant, an employer must prove that the immigrant they wish to hire is not displacing an American worker and must have the funds and patience to survive a lengthy and expensive admitted process. A small percentage of those who migrate for employment do not need to be sponsored and instead are categorized as immigrants of exceptional ability, while another subset are admitted because they are wealthy enough to invest at least $500,000 in American businesses. The remaining 20% of immigrants coming to the U.S. come mostly from three sources. About 9.5% of immigrants are refugees, and about 4.5% are people seeking asylum. At its 2015 peak, the U.S. took in about 118,000 refugees and 33,000 asylum seekers. The remaining 5% of immigrants come from the diversity lottery, which prioritizes immigrants from countries with a low rate of immigration to the United States. This lottery admits approximately 50,000 people each year. So now we have a sense of how documented immigrants are admitted to the United States. through family members, job opportunities, the diversity lottery, and programs for displaced peoples. However, we also need to understand why many immigrants are coming to America and not following the legal process along the way. While political rhetoric in the United States frequently focuses on Mexican immigrants, who still make up a large proportion of total immigrants to the U.S., Mexican immigration has actually been on the decline since 2007. By contrast, a rising proportion of both documented and undocumented immigrants have been arriving from 3 Central American countries who together are known as the Northern Triangle: El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. According to the Pew Research Center, the number of immigrants from the Northern Triangle grew by 25% between 2007 and 2015. So far in 2018, the number of Guatemalan and Honduran immigrants to the U.S. has risen sharply, while El Salvadoran immigration has declined. The Trump administration argues that the recent surges are primarily due to hunger, poverty, and a lack of opportunities in these countries. According to the Washington Post, malnutrition rates in some areas of Guatemala have approached 70%. Historically, workers from Mexico and Central America have been attracted to the United States by the possibility of higher wages. The United States currently has an average wage over 5 times higher than that of Mexico. Despite acknowledging a shift from single workers to families crossing together, the administration continues to argue that economic factors are still the primary reasons for the recent surge. Pro-immigrant activists argue that the current Central American crisis is also caused by political instability and gang warfare in the Northern Triangle. During the 1990s, both El Salvador and Guatemala ended long civil wars, leading widespread economic uncertainty. In the wake of these wars, major gangs such as MS-13 and Barrio 18, both of which were formed in Los Angeles and spread further south, became major criminal forces throughout Mexico and Central America. A U.S. Department of Justice report from 2013 cites the UN in saying that these 2 gangs have turned the Central American Northern Triangle into the area with the highest homicide rate in the world. An article from The Atlantic identifies extreme inequality, policies of mass incarceration, and weak judicial and security institutions as contributing factors to the rise of gang warfare in El Salvador, where 65,000 people, over 1% of the total population, are gang members. The same article argues that social pressure on teens leads to more people being pulled into gang sphere of influence, while attempted crackdowns by law enforcement leave residents of gang-controlled areas trapped between unfriendly forces. These factors make a compelling argument for the United States government to treat immigrants from the Northern Triangle as asylum seekers. In addition to the search for root causes, much of the debate over Central American migration is wrapped up in the question of whether Central American migrants are legally considered refugees, and whether the United States is therefore required to accept them. In its definition of a refugee, the UN describes a person who, owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable to avail himself of the protection of that country. The United States adopted the same definition in 1980, meaning that it is legally bound to accept asylum seekers who are judged to meet this definition. While persecution by gangs could be included in the UN definition of refugee, economic concerns are not, meaning that an economic interpretation of the asylum seekers' motives could be used to turn them away. So now we've covered the reasons as to why people from Central America try to immigrate to the United States, along with the debate over their refugee status. However, in order to understand why this is a major political issue today, we need to take a look at the recent history of U.S. immigration policy under both Presidents Obama and Trump. President Obama made comprehensive immigration reform a top priority during his 2008 campaign, promising to enact policies during his first term that would secure our borders, prevent employers from abusing undocumented immigrants, and lead undocumented immigrants out of the shadows and toward citizenship. To achieve this last goal, in 2010, Obama reintroduced the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act, or DREAM Act. Originally introduced in 2001, this bill offers a pathway toward full legal status to certain undocumented immigrants, dubbed Dreamers, who entered the U.S. as children with their parents. Despite bipartisan support and its passage in the House of Representatives, the bill was killed by a Republican filibuster in the Senate. Unable to get the support of Congress, President Obama opted to take executive action by instructing the Department of Homeland Security to exercise prosecutorial discretion by delaying deportation and providing work authorization to Dreamers. This executive action was called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. DACA protections allowed 800,000 undocumented immigrants who arrived as children to work legally in the U.S. However, DACA applicants were not granted full permanent legal status, and they had to reapply every 2 years to keep their work authorization and to keep from being deported. In 2013, the Senate passed the Bipartisan Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act. Despite being considered a compromise from both parties, the bill was extremely comprehensive and would have made many key reforms, including creating a 13-year pathway to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants, earmarking $40 billion for border security, and creating a mandatory workplace verification system to prevent employers from hiring undocumented immigrants. Despite bipartisan support in the Senate, the Republican-controlled House refused to even vote on the bill, stating that any immigration measure that didn't specifically call for the expulsion of the 11 million undocumented immigrants already inside the United States violated the rule of law. Now having failed to get congressional support twice, Obama attempted in 2015 to take further executive action, expanding the scope of DACA with DAPA, Deferred Action for Parents of Americans. This action included more undocumented immigrants than DACA, this time including Dreamers' parents. This was immediately met with court challenges from states across the country, and it was eventually blocked by a circuit court decision. After the Supreme Court locked 4-4, failing to reach a decision, the lower court decision held and the expansion of DACA was blocked. While President Obama was immigrant-friendly in some regards, he was also responsible for a record number of deportations. While some of that number was due to a widening of the word deportation, his administration did gain additional funding for immigration enforcement and expanded Border Control's reach across the southern border. According to the Migration Policy Institute, the Obama administration mainly focused on removing criminals and recent arrivals. While Obama was overall more immigrant-friendly than Trump, he also laid the administrative groundwork for more severe policies. But despite this, Obama was still perceived as immigrant-friendly enough to inspire backlash from immigration opponents. A major part of President Trump's successful presidential campaign was his thoughts and proposed policies on immigration. He campaigned heavily on cracking down on immigration from dangerous countries, deporting undocumented immigrants, and building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. As of now, Congress has approved $1.6 billion to improve security at the border by replacing existing barriers and adding fencing in new areas. However, these plans are not concrete and do not look anything like Trump's proposed wall. Once President Trump took office in 2017, his administration announced that they would stop allowing DACA recipients to reapply for their protected status, qualifying Dreamers for deportation once their DACA eligibility expired. In June of 2018, the administration used a DACA repeal as a bargaining tool in negotiations with Congress over a new immigration bill, but as of September 2018, court orders prevent the federal government from ending the program. Over this past summer, another controversy occurred surrounding the Trump administration's policy toward families seeking amnesty in the United States. In April of this year, the administration intentionally separated undocumented families who crossed over the U.S. border. This policy, along with the conditions the families faced and the lack of measures used to keep track of the separated children, drew widespread public outcry. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said that the policy was intended as a deterrent, saying that, hopefully, people get the message and come through the border at the port of entry and not break across the border. In late June, the administration suspended the family separation policy, but families are still held in detention centers awaiting hearings on their refugee status. Civil rights groups continue to protest the conditions of these centers and the tactics the administration uses to coerce immigrant toddlers to sign away their right to a trial. Today, the path forward for immigrants remains uncertain as the Trump administration continues to seek restrictions on both documented and undocumented immigrants. Immigration continues to be a nationally contentious and motivating issue for both sides of the political aisle. We at the Bully Pulpit encourage our viewers to stay informed about this issue in the coming months and years. Now, this concludes our episode of the Bully Pulpit. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.